unmute yourself. Okay. Okay, great. All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are in the world. Let me turn off this little thingy here. Thank you for joining us for our monthly Global Chamber Export-Import Forum. I am the moderator, Anita Rodal, president of SBPI Services. SBPI Services connects global enterprises to the currency exchange company that best fits their needs for cross-border payments. We also broker business loans, equipment financing, and inventory financing for importers and wholesalers. I am very proud to be a member of the advisory board for the Los Angeles chapter of the Global Chamber. The Global Chamber is a growing collaborative community of CEOs, executives, and business leaders in over 525 metro regions around the globe. Its mission is to foster growth in cross-border business, trade, and investment in every region of the world by providing its members with warm introductions, valuable connections, and timely information. During the webinar, I invite you to put your contact information in the chat. Please include your full name and your LinkedIn profile link if you have one. And don't forget to save the chat before the webinar is over, because the video will be saved to YouTube, but the chat will not survive. So make sure you save that. So let me tell you how today's forum will work. The first 40 to 45 minutes, I'll be interviewing our guest expert. Again, please keep yourselves muted throughout that part of the program. And then in the last 10 to 15 minutes, we'll open it up to Q&A and conversation. So today we are very lucky to have with us the amazing Eduardo Gonzalez. And I would like to tell you a little bit about him. Eduardo Gonzalez is the president of 258 Consulting LLC. He has extensive work experience in both international and binational trade and has worked in many countries in the European Union, as well as the US and Mexico. He was the former Deputy Trade and Investment Commissioner for ProMexico in Arizona and is currently a member of the Arizona District Export Council. 258 Consulting LLC helps companies on both sides of the US-Mexico border to find solutions so they can meet their sourcing, manufacturing, and sales expansion goals. Eduardo is a specialist in opening new markets for companies in both the US and Mexico, leveraging his proficiency at creating strategic business plans and his ability to research and analyze economic and market data, which is why I'm so happy to be talking to him today. So again, welcome, Eduardo.
Thank you, Anita. Appreciate the introduction. Happy to be here.
My pleasure. Okay, so I always start off these interviews with 3 generic questions, call them icebreakers, whatever you want, but it gives us a chance just to know a little bit about the interviewee before we get into the real meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about today. So these are just really brief questions. And I always want to know, for example, Eduardo, what got you into this field?
So thank you, Anita. So I started my life as a CPA, an accountant, a credit risk manager for the Mexico Development Bank. And at that time, the Mexico Development Bank in Mexico had also the mandate to promote exports and foreign direct investment. So within the bank, I transitioned to the promotional department because it seems more interesting doing foreign direct investment than analyzing risk for loans. And that's how I started my life in FDI and export promotion. Had the opportunity to work in Europe, like you mentioned, in the Netherlands. We were in charge of the Benelux and Nordic countries. And then by 2007, a new federal government came into place and decided to create a new organization that took over the responsibilities from the Mexico Development Bank. And that's how ProMexico was created. And in 2018, we got a new Mexican president who decided to change gears again and a new policy, but he was more drastic. He is doing sort of what is currently happening here in the US. He reduced the federal government employee base, and all 52 offices around the world from Mexico were closed. And so that gave me an opportunity to start my own consultancy. And that's what I've been doing for the past 5 years. So that's how it all started.
Perfect. Perfect. I love to see how you get from point A to point B and everything in between. What do you like the most about what you do?
So, I mean, the possibility to connect people and facilitate the introductions and find solutions, right? So that's the main goal, which coincides very well with the Global Chamber's main goal, right, and mission. And that's what I most like about this activity is to find solutions for complicated problems, right? And basically focusing on contract manufacturing and import export. And that's probably what I enjoy the most. Go into different industries, meeting different people, and helping them in one way or another.
Awesome. Okay, and the flip side of that is what do you like the least about what you do? There's got to be
So
something.
currently, yeah, currently I mean, of course, it's not everything's not as simple as it sounds. I started my own the consultancy during COVID, which was a good timing because all the supply chains were disrupted, right? From China, you got containers that used to cost $1,200 went up to, I have heard people paying almost $50,000 for a container at that time. So everybody scrambled to look for options, and Mexico seemed, apologies for the noise, um, the everybody scrambled to look for options, and Mexico seemed like a great idea. And so that opportunity that everybody was looking as an option in Mexico um, gave me opportunity to help them, right? So it was a high volume. Sorry, they're moving some tables here. I wasn't expecting.
Okay.
And so the frustrating part is competing with China. That's the frustrating part because Chinese costs are well below market price anywhere in the world. Their prices are below market price of what you can find anywhere in the world, especially commodities and some components. And that's very frustrating, right? That it's not a level playing field for everyone. And that's one of the reasons tariffs are part of the solutions that countries find to manage this type of difference in competitiveness for countries. But yeah, that's the only thing that I don't like. I would prefer a more level playing field for everyone.
Well, that makes perfect sense. Okay, so now let's get more into subject matter. So a lot of people may not know, but there are different categories of manufacturers in Mexico. So I want to delve into each one briefly, but discuss the differences. So we have maquiladoras, we have shelters, we have contract manufacturers, and then we have just Mexican companies who are exporting. So can you describe, for people who are not familiar with this, what is a maquiladora?
Sure. So maquiladora was the original term. Right now it's called IMEX, IMMEX. So the maquiladora program is basically a federal government program that facilitates the import of raw materials, duty-free or inbound, to be transformed into a product and be exported uh, from Mexico to the US. So basically, companies take advantage of the low labor cost, right? And the maquiladora started around between 1935 and 1950 when
Wow.
Mexico got this influx of Mexicans that were deported from the US. So this has happened before, right? We had this after the war where everybody was coming back to the US and now there was no labor shortage. There were enough laborers. So a lot of Mexicans were deported and they were deported to the border towns. So the federal government came up with this initial program for companies to bring in inbound into 20 miles or 50 miles from the border to set up their own manufacturing with special conditions. They cannot do it in farther 50 miles. It was a restriction on the border. So that worked pretty well. So by 1965, they established the Maquiladora program. By 67, there were like 60 companies, and right now we're probably close to 6,000 companies. So these maquiladoras it's a program. Most of them are international companies, but a Mexican company can offer a maquiladoras type of service. And so maquilas are a cost unit for most companies. So meaning that whatever they import in cost, they export in value. So there's no earnings. So the government taxes those operations differently from traditional income tax. So basically, a maquila gets taxed 6 or 7% either by their assets or by their cost. There are several ways. So just for your public to know that there is some tax for the maquiladora. There are some incentives, but they don't pay income tax as traditional companies. They have this special treatment, right? And of course, maquilas account for most of the exports in Mexico. Probably 64% of the GDP is maquiladora operation. Shelters, what they do is those are Mexican firms that offer the service to hire employees and import equipment under the name of a client, an international client, and do the manufacturing under their own LLC or company, meaning that they are sheltered from the Mexican government for labor issues or tax issues or import export. So it is a service. So for every dollar that the Mexican company spends on behalf of their client, they put a percentage of the service. So it is a service that is provided for manufacturing companies to start right away in Mexico because they are able to operate under the shelter company name, and they're able to import, export, and start manufacturing fairly quickly. So it's a great option. Contract manufacturers, well, are Mexican companies or a private company that manufactures a product or provides a service based on the client's designs or needs, right? And it's a share. There's no obligation, there's no responsibilities for labor, so they share the cost. Let's put it that way. And then you have exporters that they offer a good services as is to potential clients. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that's great. So we're not really talking about Mexican exporters in terms of foreign companies coming in and manufacturing in Mexico. It's a totally different category, basically. It's a Mexican company that is producing something to export to the world, including the US and other countries, right?
Correct. And there's a lot of interest in that part because, as you know, a lot of manufacturing left the US to China. And that created a very comfortable way of doing manufacturing, right? Where the US company just hire this Chinese corporation to do their product and have them make a product, right? But with those risks of having their product being copied or competing with their supplier, there's where Mexico has some advantages. But we can talk about that later on.
Okay, fantastic. So as of today, with the US, Mexico, Canada, the USMCA by other, as an acronym, in place, does the US currently apply tariffs to any Mexican imports?
So the USMCA, as it is right now, there is no tariffs on import-export for those products and services that comply with the rules of origin. Different sectors have different rules. For example, automotive has a certain higher percentage of origin of the labor and parts that can be under the USMCA tariffs. But as we know it, the free trade agreement is still in place. The risks right now of paying 25% tariffs still there. We thought we had a month. We learned this morning that, or yesterday, that the extension was only good until March 4th. So next week. So we will find out if the USMCA is still in place by March 4th, or if we're going to be talking tariffs of 25% of Mexican goods coming into the US. But we will see. We will find out. And the USMCA is going to be it's going to come into revision in 2026. So discussions are going to be started this year to see where the negotiation is going to be. And we know for a fact that the automotive is very sensitive, and of course the risk of restrictions for Chinese companies setting up manufacturings in Mexico using Chinese manufacturing components. So there's going to be a lot of talk around that and some other stuff that the federal government in the US is currently analyzing where they want to go with this. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Does Mexico, with the USMCA currently in place, do they apply any tariffs to US imports at this time?
No, it's the same rules as USMCA treaty applies. I'm sure that there's going to be some retaliation if they put tariffs on Mexican goods and services next week. We don't know what that's going to look. We know that the President Sheinbaum has ordered the economic ministry to analyze those sensitive and sectors that Mexico can retaliate, but there hasn't been a mention of which industries or sectors are going to be more affected. But for sure, there's going to be some retaliation. Yes.
Okay. Is that basically just going to throw the USMCA, at least between Mexico and the US, kind of like it doesn't exist? Is everybody just going to ignore it because that's pretty much what the US government is going to do if they, if they apply tariffs?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah, probably that's what they're going to do. Is going to basically end the USMCA, right?
Still the Mexico Canada part of that, even if the US to Mexico and US to Canada, if the US is messing with those 2 points,
Right.
can Mexico and Canada still keep their parts of it in place, or would they need to form a new treaty?
That's a good question. It's a trilateral agreement. Probably that's going to be some discussions. I don't know if one country cancels their participation, that's enough to get rid of it, or if they need. I'm not a specialist in free trade agreements. What I do know is that Mexico has 13 free trade agreements with 50 countries. So I imagine that this will open the door for a bilateral trade agreement between Mexico and Canada.
Okay, and that would make perfect sense. So okay, we know that they're talking about 25% tariffs by the US on Mexican imports or imports from Mexico. Do you know if you may or may not know this, but would it apply to all the different types of manufacturers, the maquiladoras, the shelters, and the contract manufacturers the same? I mean, we know obviously it would apply to exporters, just straight, Mexican exporters, but these different types of manufacturing organizations would they get hit the same?
Yeah, I think it's going to be across the border because it's not going to be a particular rule for a company. It's going to be a rule for a product or a sector. So if a Mexican company is doing automotive, or is it doing an international company doing it through a maquila program, they're still exporting a vehicle or a motor or an auto part. So that's going to be they're going to get hit across the board. There's probably they're going to pick and choose industries. Initially, they talk metals, and commodities, corn. I think that was one of the issues. But the greatest impact is going to be around equipment, oil and gas, automotive, and electronic components. Just in
What
that,
about,
go ahead.
no, I was gonna say, what about aerospace?
Yeah, of course, airspace is going to be impacted, but it's not that big of part of all the exports. It's only a fraction. I believe that if you take automotive, oil and gas, metals, machinery, electric components, probably we're talking more than a third of all exports from Mexico to the US.
Wow. Okay. Yes. All right. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. So we know that Mexico would retaliate. So at the end of the day, who actually pays the cost of these tariffs?
So at the end of the day, uh, citizens of both countries are going to be impacted because it's not only going to be increase in prices and inflation, but it also is going to impact labor. So there's a lot of adjustments are going to be done in on the employee side, but also of course inflation is going to be the biggest impact. I mean, these are costs that are going to be transferred to consumers, right? At the end of the day, they're going to be paying. Somebody has to pay it, and the end users usually who pays all of this increase in cost in manufacturing. There are going to be adjustments. There are going to be some type of negotiations, but at the end of the day, this is an inflationary measure that is going to be impact the economy of both sides, and it's going to impact across the board in consumers, but also I think in the society itself, right? Because are going to be a lot of jobs. There's going to be a lot of adjustments between the countries, and yeah, it's not going to be pretty.
No, I would imagine not. So I was trying to imagine if the states that do the most, importing or work with the maquiladoras the most, for example, on the US side, when these tariffs hit and sales slow down for them, or it knocks their buying, their customer base out altogether because of price. Um, so those states that are going to be most affected, because they're the ones that do the importing or the manufacturing, um, will they also feel the biggest economic effect of this, or do you think it'll be just universal across the whole US because there's a
No,
tax base that goes to, the federal government?
so on the Mexican side, the impact is going to be on the border towns initially because there is where the high concentration of manufacturing import export business is being uh, felt, and that's where all the services, good and services cross the border and our services providers. So the impact is going to be on the border towns. On the U.S. side, the economy is more diversified. There's going to be impact in greater regions in different levels, but I don't think the border towns are going to be greatly impacted. Only the towns that are right on the border, like Nogales or Chula Vista, San Isidro, El Paso, those
Mhm.
cities for sure are going to
Mhm.
feel the impact for sure. Consumer wise, right now there's impact with the immigration policies. You see that border towns are receiving a lot of people, so that's an impact. Security uh, risk increases with that, and this will only add on all the current problems that they have. And yeah, it's going to be a difficult situation. But yes, the impact will be first felt on the cities on the border, and then it will gradually move to the rest of the economy.
So will it move through the states first? Like you got El Paso in Texas. Will Texas feel the effect, you think, before the rest of the United States?
Yeah,
Will California feel the effects before the rest of the United States? That kind of a.
I think so. Yeah, I think California and Texas are going to feel the grunt of the problem, the heavy part, and of course Arizona has some impact also. But I think considering the high volume of import exports and those two border towns, I mean, 35,000 trucks cross the border every day, and most of those traffic is on the border towns in Texas and California. So for sure, the impact is going to be much greater in those regions. And of course, here in Arizona, Nogales they're going to feel it, of course, for sure. But there's such a small town, so far away that for them is going to be a great impact, right? But compare that with Arizona economy, it's going to be gradual to hit the rest of the cities. Yeah. Of course, the produce industry in Nogales is going to feel it greatly because that's most of the business that they do over there, right? Compared with the electronic components and aerospace and automotive on the other regions, right?
Yeah. Are there states other than the border states that have complementary businesses that depend on the states that are like immediately involved in import export that we wouldn't normally think of as being really affected by all of this, but that may, like, so for example, we're talking automotive. So, we think of like Detroit, so Michigan. So
Of course. Yeah.
would a state like that feel an immediate impact as well because of
Yeah.
the industry that they're strong in, even though they're not a border state?
Yeah. I mean, Detroit has been feeling it for a while now. The automotive industry has been hit, uh, yeah, pretty bad since a while back. So those particular states, they have a vocation for a particular industry. Washington State, for example, aerospace, they're going to feel it, of course. Boeing is there. And another particular industry there that they're very focused on the industry, mainly automotive or mining or oil and gas, and like Texas, right? They do a lot of business cross border with Mexico, not only import export of the actual oil and gas, but also they provide a lot of services and equipment and parts, and that's going to be greatly affected. So yes, for sure, those regions that have a vocation for a particular industrial sector, they're going to feel it. In Mexico, you have the automotive industry, which complies of 5 states, Mexican states. That region is going to be affected on the automotive for sure. Border towns are more electronic components uh, uh, are going to be affected, and yeah, garment industry in Mexico City and surrounding area, the same thing. Which of course they have been impacted for many years since China came into the international supplier chain manufacturing arena. But yeah, those regions that have a vocation, a particular dependency on an industry, of course, are going to feel it. Yeah.
Okay. Um, and so you already talked about Mexico's biggest exports to the US, but what are some of the US's biggest exports to Mexico?
So yeah, they look pretty similar. The U.S. exports oil mining equipment, oil and gas, electronic components, equipment, automotive. Uh, yeah, I think so. About a third of it is probably electronic equipment, machinery, and computer parts. And then you have your minerals, your fuels, vehicles, plastics. That will be probably another third. So between those two, you have more than 60% of the exports. And then you have all the commodities, right? Cereals and iron ores and metals. But I think the biggest exports are for sure the electronic equipment, machinery, and computers, and followed by all the fuels and minerals and automotive.
if the tariffs,
plastics.
if Mexico puts the tariffs on those things from the US, ironically, would they then start buying more from China and other places, which even would cause greater harm to the US manufacturers in those
Well,
areas?
you have to take in consideration that most of these main industrial sectors or products are the same ones that are going from Mexico to the U.S. They only come back as a finished product, right? So they're intertwined, right? So it's not a matter of just finding a substitute. It means that the whole supply chain is connected, right? It's not like okay, we're not going to send automotives into Mexico, but the automotives are made in Mexico. So, so they're only coming back as a finished product. So it's not a matter of substitution. It's a matter of moving the whole supply chain of those industry. Oil and gas is Mexico exports crude oil and comes back as plastics and as gasoline and other products that are produced by that crude oil, right? So it's a back and forth of this supply chain. We're not talking products. We're talking whole supply chains here.
Wow, so it's a lot more convoluted than I
Yeah.
think a lot of people would think.
Yeah,
So,
there's some. I was
go
just going to
ahead.
mention there's some
Yeah.
statistics out there that say that some parts, and I believe those are aerospace. Some say there's automotive, but I think it's more aerospace that a part cross the border 8 times. So, for example, they do a metal part in Mexico, and then it gets sent back to the U.S. to do a chemical treatment of that metal, and then it comes back, and then they do some more cutting of that metal and making it, shaping it into the final form. And then it goes back into the US for some heat treatment. And then it comes back to Mexico. And then they add some components to it. And then it goes to the US again. And then they do something else over there. And then it comes back. And then it goes back again. So it goes back and forth a lot of times, at least 3 times. I mean, if you're talking automotive, a part comes here and then it goes back for installation and then it comes back as a finished product, as a vehicle, right? So yeah, so we're again talking supply chains here, not actual products.
Not to mention logistics and trucking, industries are
Right.
if all that stops, that's going to be a huge blow to them as well. All the
Yeah.
ancillary businesses that depend on the flow of products from one country to the other.
Yeah,
Wow.
and the great example is the automotive industry. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a supply chain that has been developed for, I don't know, it's going to be almost 60, 70 years, right? When it started. So it's you don't pick up and set it up in someplace else, something that took years to set up.
Yeah.
It's not as easy.
Yeah. I'm guessing that that's what they're counting on to apply pressure. But so even with 25% tariffs on goods, if a US company is looking for a supplier to manufacture a product, do you think Mexico is still a good option and why?
Well, there's a lot of reasons why. So I mentioned the free trade agreements. So those 13 free trade agreements with 50 plus companies, that's a great opportunity for companies to take advantage, diversify their export market. So you can export to the European Union, you can export to Latin America. So you can take advantage of that and be insulated of whatever is going on between the other countries. So that's one reason. But the big driver of companies setting up operations in Mexico is going to be the geographic location to the US market and of course the labor cost. But not only labor cost, but also productivity. All these years in the Maquila experience has created a very strong labor force, very knowledgeable in the way of doing things in the U.S., very productive. So and very competitive in cost, right? So that's another reason. A lot of people go to China because of the lower cost in manufacturing in general. but there are some risks, right? You have the geopolitical risk. You don't know if they're going to decide to take over Taiwan. Everything points that it's only a matter of time. The other reason is the risk. It doesn't always happen, but sometimes it does, that they take your product and they make it for other companies, right? So that's another reason you don't want to compete with your supplier, right? You want to have protection to your IP, and that what the USMCA provides. It provides protection to your IP internationally. And I think those are very good reasons for company to look at Mexico as an option to manufacture in and take advantage the of the free trade agreements, but also the local market. I mean, there's 130 million Mexicans. There's a very interesting market. They're they're very interested in consuming products and always looking for new products. So the market is there, the free trade agreements are there, and productivity is there. So of course, I mean, it's not everything's rosy, right? There's some issues, right? The energy, water, the security are reasons, but I mean they're manageable, right? If you take the pros and the cons, I think there are more pros than cons.
Yeah, I would think so. Um, when you talk about automotive, I think one of the reasons it makes it so complex is because there's so many moving parts, literally. But are there resources that Mexico has that we absolutely don't have here in the US? So importing is a matter of necessity, if we want, XYZ product, as opposed to, oh, it could get made here in the US. Well, maybe it can't because the materials don't exist in the United States. So are there things that we depend on Mexico, to your knowledge, for those
No,
kinds of things?
I cannot think other than tequila and Mexican beer.
That sounds good.
That's
Mezcal.
there's no exactly there's no other
Right.
region that you can get it from. No, I think the great dependency right now is China. They're, for example, electronic components, electric motors, uh, some solar cells. There's no other source in the world other than China, and I think there's where the dependency is right now. Currently, Mexico is just another option to manufacture products and goods with those components. And if you want to set up those type of manufacturing in the region of North America, it will take time and it will take a lot of subsidies from the governments, like we are seeing in the semiconductor industry. That's a great example, right? If we want to be independent on strategic manufacturing, the government has to help establish those supply chains in those industries. Because we saw it also again in COVID, there were no face mask manufacturers in the US. Right? Nobody was manufacturing. And that's a basic, uh, at that time was very basic and very a necessity.
Yeah.
But you have a lot of, like I said, electric components, some sensors, uh, batteries. Nowhere in the world you're going to get batteries and a competitive price other than China. Um, and plastics, of course. I mean, I'll give you an example. There's a supplier in Texas that supplies the plastic industry, raw materials, and they sell their product cheaper in China than in the US. So if a company wants to get that same product cheaper, they have to go to China to buy it to get that lower price. And the explanation for that is that they say that over there is more competitive, so they have to lower the price. So, but you cannot get that price here. So that's how difficult this supply chain and the movement of raw materials and being competitive in the global marketplace is. That's how China is affected in all this. Yeah.
Wow. So, okay. I don't want to get off subject. I have thoughts on that. But anyways, okay. So we have about 15 minutes left. So I'm happy to open it up now to question and answers, commentary, conversation. So if people want to take themselves off of mute, and if they have any questions for Eduardo or any comments, or let me ask, is anybody already running into this in your daily work world where this is just the talk of having the tariffs has affected any of your clients if you're in anything that is global related? I'm curious. Like Elizabeth, I'm curious. No pressure, but you're on mute, honey. There you go.
Well, it will impact. We just don't know how, how it's going to move forward. And I'm thinking perhaps this will be implemented. Let's see how long it lasts, because if it has major negative impact, I suspect that maybe the US, everyone will step back. What are your thoughts on that, Eduardo? Do you think that Mexico would pull back?
On the free trade
Assuming that the
agreement,
US also pulls back.
I don't think there's a way to pull back. Like I said, we're so intertwined. We're so dependent. I mean, and there's some comments also in the chat whether we're more competitive as a region, right? So I mean, there's no way of pulling this back. I mean, I think business is like water; it will find the path, right? And I think the path for us is through the U.S. and Canada also as a partner. But there's no way of pulling this back.
Well, and I'm talking about pulling back the tariffs, not the agreement, because that's a sound established agreement.
Well, if they pull back the tariffs and they're going to apply the same type of tariffs as the U.S. as a retaliation measure, right? And that's going to be only for a while. It's going to be painful. It's going to take time, but then the water will subside and we'll come back. I think that to the back to the table and negotiate the agreement. But I think it's going to be a reaction from the Mexican government for sure, and it's going to be in equal measures. Yes, for sure. Yeah. Until we really know what they want to negotiate, right? Which we saw with the Panama Canal. They said we want to take over the Panama Canal, and at the end they're receiving illegals from China and Pakistan and other parts of the world in Panama and have them handle the repatriation from Panama. So that's a negotiation, right? So we don't know what he really wants. Well, we know somewhat. Yeah.
That's true. I was going to say, David Harlow, if you're on the line, maybe you can share, because he has actually been working with the free trade zones, been working with companies that proactively have been importing products ahead of the tariffs. David, do you want to share something with the group?
Yes. Thanks a lot, Elizabeth. And I guess what I would say is, and I don't think it's a solution to solve the tariff issue, but it definitely is a way to navigate the tariff issue that we're anticipating, is utilizing bonded warehouses and foreign trade zones. But again, that's just to help manage those tariffs, very similar to maquiladoras. You know, they help in that sense a little bit as well. I guess my question, Eduardo, for you is, the way I had understood it was that the tariffs are being implemented potentially under the IEEPA. I'm sure I got that acronym wrong, which is for a temporary tariff that may last as long as who knows until it's determined, but that it doesn't necessarily impact USMCA, because USMCA affects the duties. And that's how the administration is able to apply tariffs on free trade agreement countries. Am I getting that correct, or is there something else I'm not aware of?
No, you're totally right, David. Yeah, okay. That's exactly what it is. Yeah, exactly. The USMCA will stay in place There's no threat about that. You're correct.
Okay.
I'm afraid I was wrong, but yeah, you are correct. This will
No.
be under the AIEA,
Yeah.
and
No, but I also
Yeah.
completely agree with you though, that the benefits of USMCA are really going away because the tariffs would
Right.
create such an impact. So, I definitely think it resonates a lot of what you're saying. So I appreciate your time talking today.
Thank you. Yeah,
Can
that
you
will
share
be
what
the direct impact. Yeah.
Yeah,
excuse me,
absolutely.
can you share what the IEE, what that is?
Yeah, that's and again, I'm trying to get the acronym correct, but it's the Emergency Economic Impact Act, I think is what it's called. I'd have to look it up. I don't have it offhand right now, but it's the mechanism that the administration's using to apply the tariff.
Ah, okay.
So that's how that tariff is being applied versus what previous tariffs were based on national security. This one's based on emergency economic impact.
Thank
Act,
you.
I believe what it's called. So,
Which I think they're tying to immigration, and that's their excuse for doing that. But one of the things that I keep thinking is, I don't care, a rose by under their name smells as sweet. So you can say they're applying this and that, and that gives them the mechanism to violate the USMCA. But
well,
what it does, it destroys our credibility. Like, what's the point of having a trade agreement with the United States if we're always
Yeah.
backdooring them, like going around them, finding a way to violate them under, you know, under the veil of a supposed economic or political emergency? Like, do you guys feel like our credibility is forever damaged? Like, what, or is it going to go administration to administration? Like, how do we get past this? As a country that has been up until this point looked at as a leader, and now as a country that is just simply not respecting its agreements.
well, I guess the first thing I would say is, like I said, the USMCA is not going away, but the benefits, the overall net benefits seem to go away. I would agree. My big concern has been there's over the last 10 years, we've seen the political narrative using trade as a mechanism or a tool to achieve political agendas. And in my lifetime, in the last 30, 40 years, I haven't seen this happen in a significant way. And so it's definitely concerning to me, because we definitely want to try to separate trade from politics, so that there's an overarching benefit for multiple countries and industries around the world.
And
I
let me
would
just
agree.
mention that the real issue here is, again, is China, right? Because we're talking deficits, but China has a $1 trillion super avid, right? So that's where all the deficits in the world are going, is going to China at the end of the day. Right? So, and the
Well, that
reason
makes
is
sense.
that they don't play fair in the way how they do business. If they were to play fair, if metals should cost the same everywhere in the world, we'll be fine. And the rest of the plastics and all the commodities, that will be a level field, right? But over there, they're subsidizing a lot of stuff, and that disrupts all the supply chains.
Yeah.
No, that makes perfect sense. Um,
And the thing I would
we'll see
close
what
with is definitely look at foreign trade zones and bonded warehouses, look at
Right.
maquiladoras, look at other federal programs in both countries, all three countries, to find ways to mitigate or navigate those tariffs is
Yeah.
important to do.
Or do as I think Adidas did, or some high-end tennis maker change the description of their sneakers to slippers, or so they can get a tariff
Yeah, I would
reduction.
not advise that.
No,
Exactly.
yes.
Yeah,
That's
I don't know how
dangerous.
they did this, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Love
agree
it.
with you. That you should not be creative on classifying your products. I agree.
That's
Yeah.
not a good practice, not at all.
Yeah.
No, I know.
Well, but having said that, because of the tariffs in the first administration, a lot of the big companies, they were working with attorneys to see if they could what they could reclassify, if anything. And for our small and medium-sized manufacturers, they don't have the ability to do that. Cost-wise, it's just not efficient.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's correct. They talk to companies that say that even a 5% increase in tariffs will put them out of business.
Right.
So yeah, I agree. Small and medium-sized companies are a total different. They're more sensitive to all
The
these
one thing
disruptions.
I would recommend to businesses is along the border, there's been such a loose view of valuation and classification because there were no duty impacts. And now that there are tariff impacts, I would anticipate businesses as well as the US government are going to focus more on, is the valuation accurate? Is the classification accurate? Because that can have large impacts. And so, making sure you have the correct bond, making sure you're set up to be able to pay those tariffs through ACH accounts, making sure you've done your due diligence, or at least, if nothing else, audited your own self to make sure that what you're representing and reporting is accurate, because it does fall under more scrutiny now than when there were no financial impacts.
Yeah, assuming they are enough federal employees doing audits.
True.
Right.
Yes, you're right.
Eduardo.
It's just,
Yeah. Hi, Anita. It's Mark Cohen.
Hi,
How are you?
Mark.
How you
Hi,
doing?
Mark.
hello, nice.
How
nice
you
to see
doing? What a great conversation, and very, very informative. It was amazing. David, your impact was great also with Elizabeth. I was listening to everything, and Eduardo, you really advise, try to educate as much as you can over the years that you've been doing the business over in Mexico. And with all the business that I've done years ago with China and so forth, we're just in an economic time right now where it's day to day, of course, and but the information you're giving for the chamber and all the businesses that we're trying to do right now is really going to be very impactful to give them the advice of what they need to move forward. It's the guidance of you utilizing the day to day of what we're doing because of what's going on in the political sector right now.
I agree.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Alrighty. So we are almost at the top of the hour. I want to thank Eduardo so very, very much for your input. This was perfect timing that we could do this. This will be up on the Global Chamber's YouTube channel, so you'll be able to find it probably, say, Thursday. If not tomorrow, it'll be up by Monday for sure. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, then I hope you'll join us every fourth Thursday of the month, the next one being the 27th of March, where we will delve into another topic that is salient to people who export and import. And just so you know, spoiler alert, it will be about this same issue with Canada. We'll wait until we're a week or so out from that date to formulate the questions, because we don't know what's going to happen on the 4th of March or the 3rd of March or whatever, anytime in March, actually. But do make sure you check out all the events on the calendar of the Global Chamber. If you're not a member, a lot of the events are open to non-members. However, chances are you might want to join, because there's pretty much something for everybody in every time zone. So this is one of the most far-reaching and useful chambers probably in the entire world. So I would encourage you to check those out. So thank you so much, everybody. We appreciate your time. Thanks for being here, and we will see you in March.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Anita.
Thank
Bye,
you,
everyone.
Thank
And don't
you.
forget, sign up for the Export League on the Global Chamber. Look it
Yes.
up.
Awesome.
Yes, thank you.
Great.
Great.
Take care,
Thanks a
guys.
lot.
Tomorrow.
Thank you.
So,
Thanks, everybody.
There.
Thank you.
gracias, don
Bye.
Eduardo.
Adios.
Adios.
Ciao.